Mainline heritage in Victoria is lively and ongoing, with several heritage lines and organisations keeping the fire in the boilers alive. In this video, I'll be going through the history of how trains began, how preservation groups formed, and a little bit of present day. Humble beginnings. Enthusiast tours have been around since, well, forever. Ever since the VR days, enthusiast trains have run, especially to more scenic destinations. You could also charter a train, and many people did, although these were few and far between. At the beginning of the diesel era, high school train clubs would be allowed to run special excursions to far-off destinations, usually with rail motors, but sometimes with steam engines. Here's a photo of one of these tours at Camperdown, with the Carey Grammar and Reservoir High School railway clubs. A lot of the railway clubs in the high schools also federated and became the VSRCA, the Victorian Schools Railway Club Association. Too bad it doesn't exist today. Approaching the 1960s, the full abolition of steam engines was apparent. Many enthusiast tours were running at this time, many of these tours run by the ARHS. What is the ARHS, you may ask? Well, to answer that question, we have to roll the clock back to 1933. On the 19th of May, 6 enthusiasts met up in Sydney and formed the Great Railway Circle of Australia. Soon, more members would join, and in 1936, the name was changed to the Australian Railway and Locomotive Society. The main goal of the society was to document history and preserve railway heritage. Membership rapidly grew, and in 1945, the Victorian Division was formed, with more divisions following. The name was officially changed to the Australian Railway Historical Society, ARHS, in 1951. The ARHS slowly expanded into publishing and organising events. Interesting locations would be selected, and the ARHS would charter a train to allow people to visit. In the late 1950s, ARHS tours were becoming even more prevalent, especially with the amount of closing rail lines and steam engines being withdrawn. These tours weren't just happening in Victoria either, or even on government-owned railways. Small narrow-gauge industrial lines were also being toured. Static displays were also preserved by the ARHS, with the ARHS lobbying hard after the loss of the S-Class streamliners. The VR agreed to set aside locomotives for preservation. The first in the collection was X36 in 1961, which narrowly escaped death when the VR chief mechanical engineer intervened at the 11th hour. By now, the ARHS had quite a collection, with the collection spread around at Newport or just in random yards. This system would not last, and the ARHS entered negotiations with the VR again on the 10th of November 1962. The ARHS was granted a section of Newport workshops by the Victorian Railways to display the machines. I also can't mention the ARHS Museum without the efforts of Gerald D., a railway man who would buy up as many scrapped steam engine plates as he could, collating over 450 plates from locomotives all over the world. He was also instrumental in the preservation of Polly, Z526, Heavy Harry, and X36. If you want more information on the man himself, there is a bibliography written by John Fowler. Steam rail. D3639 was the Commissioner's locomotive, the locomotive used for hauling the Victorian Railways Commissioner around, but it was also used in regular service, just more well kept than the others. 639 was the last D3 in service, and because of its role, it was the perfect candidate for mainline heritage trains. In January 1946, it was replaced as the Commissioner's locomotive by Y123. However, it wasn't withdrawn. The Association of Railway Enthusiasts operated a number of tours with it. This was enough time for a group of volunteers to enter and complete arrangements with the VR, and in October 1964, it became the first steam locomotive to be fully operated and maintained by volunteers, while still being government-owned, a system still used to this day. These enthusiasts then formed a committee, established in 1965, called the Steam Preservation Coordination Committee. The committee soon expanded further, not just servicing and maintaining locomotives, it also needed to retain and upkeep facilities such as turntables and water towers, as well as acquiring rolling stock. The committee soon started to operate more steam locomotives around Victoria, as the VR set aside more steam locomotives for excursion tours, including K153, R761, R707, just to name a few. However, all of these had just been locomotives that the VR set aside. D3639 operated for a few more years. However, in 1973, a boiler failure resulted in her withdrawal from service, and she was stored in the siding at Newport workshops. while the other steam locomotives were all mostly operational and required minimal effort to get working, Steam Rail was about to complete their first full restoration. K190 was acting as the North Bendigo pilot. However, its main internal steam pipe, the pipe which carried steam from the superheater to the cylinders, failed, and thus it was withdrawn and stored at Bendigo. It was then plucked out by Steam Rail for restoration. A tour ran where K153 and K184 went to pick it up on the 12th of May 1979, and it was transferred to Bayswater, slowly being restored right there in the yard. Here's a photo of it with J541, which was being stored at Bayswater at the time, emerging out of the yard in a rather lime green. The first steam locomotive officially restored by Steam Rail Victoria. Steam Rail moved to a much more permanent settlement in 1981, the Newport Railway Workshops, a place where its collection would be much more safely kept, and many more steam engines would re-emerge from Newport in the coming decades. K153 was restored in 1983 and D3639 returned in 1984, but these new workshops would soon be home to a few more organizations. 707 operations. In 1971, when excursion trains were still running, on the 16th of July 1971, R707 hauled a special train to Ballarat. The engine performed superbly up the gradients of the Ballarat line, and many kind words were said about the engine. On the 11th of July 1980, a committee of 6 people formed a group called Plan R, with the purposes of restoring R707, specifically chosen because of these comments. It had been withdrawn from service in 1974 and was just sitting in storage at the erecting shop of Newport Workshops, feeling very sorry for itself. However, on the inside, its mechanical condition was fair, not the best, but fair. On the 6th of October 1980, a meeting was held with the chief mechanical engineer of VicRail, and a proposal was put forward. On the 17th of October 1980, another meeting was held, this time with the chief workshops manager. This meeting allowed R707 to be restored by volunteers. It was then towed to the tarpaulin shop where work commenced on R707 on the 7th of February 1981. On the 18th of December 1981, it was transferred over to Spotswood Workshops, where 707 operations would be based for many years. The first step was an overhaul, stripping the locomotive down to find anything wrong with it. Work was done to the boiler, frames, wheels, axles, cab fittings, smoke box, cylinders, motion gear, and tender, and bit by bit, the locomotive was put back together, with static steam tests occurring in late 1984, passing the tests with flying colours. Final adjustments were made, and on the 20th of July 1985, R707 returned to service running a trip to Bacchus Marsh. Once restored, it was christened with the name City of Melbourne, after the city it was based in since 1968. The group eventually acquired a small shunter to shunt around Spotswood. In March 1986, F208 was withdrawn from service, being a Dynon shunter for many years, even being unofficially christened as Dynon Donk. The locomotive was in storage for a short time before it was purchased by 707 and restored. The name Plan R was no longer accurate and was changed to 707 Operations in 1992. 707 Operations was also kicked out of Spotswood as the PTC no longer required it, so it was to be leased. The two operationals and the stored locomotives, R753 and F204, made the journey and moved to roads 7 and 8 of the Newport West Block. Spotswood Depot is now the John Holland Rail Maintenance Vehicle Depot. It is also where ULG Rail is today. Since then, 707 has acquired much more passenger stock and a lot more diesel electrics. Seymour Railway Heritage Centre. This is the last of what I call the Big Three heritage organisations. After rationalisation swept the VR's rail network, the Seymour Locomotive Depot was deemed useless and was written off. A group of railwaymen got together and were determined to keep the railway heritage of Seymour alive. The Seymour Locomotive Steam Preservation Group was formed in 1983. J515 was picked out from the storage pile at Newport Workshops, and here it is in storage with D3639. It and a few carriages were railed over to Seymour in January 1984, requiring an extensive overhaul, taking 4 years of hard volunteer work, officially leaving Seymour under its own power in June 1988. Since then, a few more steam locomotives have been acquired and a lot more diesels. The group eventually restored several Spirit of Progress carriages and a few Royal carriages, now regularly used on tours. The name was changed to the Seymour Railway Heritage Centre in December 1996, with a big focus on heritage trains on both gauges. There are a few smaller groups: the Diesel Electric Rail Motor Preservation Association of Victoria, DERMPAV, who operate out of Newport workshops. Their only operating train is RM58, which was restored at Seymour, but they also have a few other DERMs. The final organisation is the Locomotive Restoration Group, who are based in the Traralgon Roundhouse, and are building a first series N-Class out of the frames of K-Class steam locomotive K154. They currently don't operate any mainline tours, and actually don't have any rolling stock, besides what's necessary to build N441. If you want more information, I would like to point you to this video I made on the N-Class. There is the VGR, which connects to the mainline, but is a heritage railway. K160 is being restored by them, and it will be restored to mainline standards, so it might be able to do mainline tours in the future. Chugging along. Entering the late 80s, VicRail was shattered into a few tiny segments. Despite that, heritage trains were allowed to continue. Mainline heritage organisations were still happily leasing Newport workshops from the government. West Block is the heritage section, the location of Steamrail 707 and DERMPAV. You can usually tell from aerial views that it is the heritage section due to the multicoloured passenger stock just out in the yard. Central Block is used for storage and the Fire Service Museum. East Block is retained by VicTrack, the government body that owns most of the railway infrastructure in the state. It's used to store miscellaneous bits and bobs, and is prohibited to enter by volunteers unless given special permission. The ARHS Museum occupies the least amount of space, and it's pretty tight on space in modern day. Then, these last two sections are boringly operated by Metro and V-Line, what is now a Metro stabling yard, and the actual workshops part of Newport Workshops. Newport serves as an invaluable asset for railway preservation in Victoria, and there is really no place that can service and store as much heritage rolling stock as Newport can that's enclosed. When the Tate trains were officially withdrawn from service in 1984, the PTC, the Public Transport Corporation, retained a 4-car set, and those were handed over to Steamrail for restoration. Thus, a branch of Steamrail was created, Electrail. These 4 Tate cars returned to operation in 1987, along with swing door car 107M. Although these cars were banned from travelling on the network in 2004 after safety concerns. We would have had a 7-car ARHS set in preservation, although all 7 of those cars were placed off register in 1990. West Coast Rail. In 1993, another organisation joined the mainline heritage scene, West Coast Rail. In the 1990s, the operation of the public transport system was shattered into a trillion more pieces and handed out to even more private companies. One of these lines was the long-distance line to Warrnambool, and bidding for the passenger service commenced in 1993. The Victorian Railways Company Proprietary Limited, trading as West Coast Rail, won the bid, owned by Free Railway Buffs and the Australian Public Trustees. On the 19th of September, the first West Coast Rail train operated from Warrnambool to Spencer Street, hauled by N466. Unlike other regional services, which were mostly replaced with road coaches, only 2 companies retained loco services, West Coast Rail and Hoy's Road Lines. Hoy's decided to hire V-Line crews and rolling stock. However, West Coast Rail went the extra mile, buying their own rolling stock, all of which were on the scrap line at the time. Spoiler alert, most of which are still around today, and if not for West Coast Rail, they likely wouldn't. Here's a list of the 10 locos they acquired. On the rolling stock side, it's a little more boring, but a few South Australian BK class carriages were also acquired. In 1994, they also took out a 5-year lease on a portion of Ballarat East workshops for maintenance works and started refurbishing it to be a functional workshop. West Coast services were still operated using V-Line crews and rolling stock before they were officially certified in 1995, by which point they were able to purchase free 4-car Z sets that they were previously leasing from V-Line. This is cool and all, but what about the mainline heritage aspect? Well, these rail buffs wanted to operate regular steam-hauled excursions to Warrnambool. They showed interest in R711, a sizable Hudson locomotive sitting outside of Bendigo Gardens, and a deal was made with the city of Greater Bendigo to bring it back into operation. It was transferred to Ballarat in March 1995. Several modifications had to be done to allow the locomotive to keep up with the modern timetable, mainly conversion to oil firing and the ability to operate in multiple units of diesel electrics. Notice how R761 always runs solo or with another steam engine, and R711 is always in multiple unit with diesels. To facilitate mainline steam, water towers along the line had to be either reactivated, like at Colac, or relocated, such as this one at Birregurra. R711 returned to steam on the 21st of November 1998 with a very spiffy West Coast Rail livery, hauling the Sunday West Coaster. A lot of diesel locomotives were eventually restored to operation or just outright bought from V-Line, and a few more steam engines were also acquired or just restored. In 1985, Steam Rail started work on Y112 at Ballarat East. However, with limited funds, the project started stalling. That's when West Coast Rail bought the thing, and restoration works commenced. It steamed once more in 1996, usually hauling steam rail passenger cars. Another R-Class steam locomotive was leased from Steam Rail in 2000, R766, which was also repainted, and the two R-Classes would hold the West Coaster. And they would slowly acquire more steam locomotives, with small amounts of work done to each, J536, D3688, and D3641. These locomotives wouldn't have been in the best condition. West Coast Rail wanted another locomotive to run mainline tours, and started to help Steam Rail with A2986, although that arrangement didn't last long. So they acquired A2996 from Echuca in early 2000. However, everything would suddenly halt for the company. You might think this whole operation would have ended in complete financial ruin, but a tragic death was the ultimate downfall of the company. Gary McDonald, one of the company's owners, passed away on the 23rd of April 2003. The Geelong line was closed for 5 weeks in January and February 2004 due to the Regional Fast Rail project, which meant replacing rail services with road coaches. In May 2004, stress cracks were also found on the bolsters of B and S class locomotives, which reduced its operational fleet significantly. The government also wanted to reel regional passenger services back into state control, and the combination of all of these factors would wound up West Coast's operations on the 21st of August 2004. However, patronage on the Warrnambool line did increase overall by an impressive 20%. So what happened to the rolling stock? Well, as I hinted before, most of it was divided up between heritage groups, V-Line and freight operators. Much of the diesel stock was sold to CFCLA. R711, being owned by the Bendigo City Council, was allocated to Steam Rail. V-Line got S302 and a few passenger cars, 707 got a few passenger cars, Steam Rail got B64 and a few passenger cars, including South Australian K cars, which is why they are in Victoria in the first place. They also received every other steam engine besides J536, which was acquired by 707. R766 was returned to its original owners, although it was stored at Newport for a few years before moving to New South Wales. PACNAC got a few S-type carriages, which are now used as crew cars, and even Origin has a few passenger carriages also used as crew cars. In 2018, Steam Rail started a new tour called the Warrnambool West Coaster, a homage to the service of West Coast Rail, hauled by R711. And after its West Coast days, it was stripped of most modifications besides oil firing and running in diesel multiple unit. Originally, the West Coaster was just a charter for local and Steam Rail volunteer Edward White, and was never meant to go anywhere, but it was so popular that it started becoming a regular thing. Although it hasn't happened since 2023 due to the disconnection of the Warrnambool turntable, as part of the expansion of the Velocity empire. Modern day. Tours run nearly every week during steam season by all of the operators, and the heritage scene isn't slowing down anytime soon. Unfortunately, the ARHS Victorian division wound up operations in 2020 after several people issues. I'm not going to go into specifics, but Newsrail and the Newport Railway Museum are now under separate owners, and all of the ARHS collection has been donated to the PMI Victorian History Library, and it's free to access at their library. We can't mention Mainline Heritage without talking about the Newport Workshops Open Day, a bi-yearly event where heritage organisations from all over the state show off Victoria's best on the Labour Day long weekend. Many more carriages and locomotives have been restored by these organisations, accumulating quite the collection. When the veteran diesel locomotives were withdrawn, these preservation groups also picked them up as well, including an impressive 14 Y-class diesel locomotives. Much of the veteran locomotives are also now being withdrawn by freight operators, and many of them have already been donated. As of the 31st of October, 11 steam locomotives are operational, 10 of which are certified for mainline operation. Mainline trains are able to travel to all parts of Victoria. R766 is now in the care of the Picnic train, and since 2018 it has been running on the National Standard Gauge network, the only Victorian steam locomotive to have been converted to standard gauge. although J512 is also being converted to standard gauge, being worked on by the SRHC, which might be completed within the next 20 years. However, the closest R766 has returned to Victoria was the recent Albury and Wagga Wagga shuttles. Only time will tell if R766 ever returns to Victoria. In 2015, when the V-Line A classes were withdrawn, most of them were divided up between heritage groups. A60 went to Seymour, 62 went to 707, and A70 went to SSR, now painted in this very nice looking yellow livery. V-Line kept A66 and restored it into 1980s orange and grey, allowing heritage organisations to use it as a secondary locomotive on rail tours. 707 uses it frequently along with an N-class, but it's also used by Steamrail, especially when it's on trips to Gippsland. Tragically, in the same year, an arsonist attacked Newport, which destroyed all heritage swing door cars, as well as damaging a few of 707's passenger cars. Steamrail is working hard though, and we will see one more swing door car in operation very soon, with some parts stripped from 107M to be used on it. I have made a short on the topic already, and the comments have provided even more information. As part of the expansion of the Velocity Empire, NSEDs were being withdrawn, so rather than scrapping them, V-Line decided to donate them as well. Several heritage railways and mainline operators got them. 707 got a standard gauge set, the Seymour Rail Heritage Centre got a broad gauge one, Steamrail's set is in Tailem Bend for some reason. Famous tours. There are a number of famous heritage tours that have operated over the years. K190 was in South Australia, and it did a number of tours from late May to early July, going to places like Victor Harbour, Noarlunga, Port Adelaide, Bozeman, and Bridgewater. By far the largest event in Australian preservation history, to celebrate Australia's bicentenary, Flying Scotsman came to Australia in 1998, and it did a few tours in Melbourne. There was a triple parallel with Sydney Locomotive 3801, D3639, and R761, another triple parallel with the Flying Scotsman, R707 and R761. There were heritage trains to Puffing Billy, and double NAs were running to Menzies Creek. Spencer Street was also turned into a full-blown railway museum, with steam trains from all over the country displayed. R761 and K153 were running shuttles between Spencer Street and Flinders Street. Flying Scotsman also operated its first passenger trip in Australia, a return service from Melbourne to Albury on Tuesday the 25th of October 1988. R761 derailed at Seymour, which is where this famous clip comes from. Keep in mind, all of this crazy stuff was from the 14th of October to the 30th of October. In fact, Scotsman ended up staying in Victoria until the 17th of December. NWR 1991 has also made a full documentary on the tour if you would like to know more. Steamrail also has the traditional Wattle Festival, shuttles between Eltham and Hurstbridge every year since 2004, and it's a very popular event. For 707's 30th birthday, R711, R707, and R761 all did a triple-header tour to Seymour. There was a steam spectacular in 2017, where D3639, A2986, and R761 triple-headed up to Ballarat, then ran top and tail backwards to Geelong before splitting off to do some parallel running. There is also Steamrail's Snow Train, where R711 and R761 double head to Morwell and back 2 times over 2 weekends every year. Although due to weekend works on the Gippsland line, it hasn't been running recently. 707 operates the Vinelander, which was the now defunct passenger service to Mildura, and it takes about 4 days from Melbourne to Mildura and back, using their standard gauge NSET, and it's wildly popular. The Welcome Back Red Rattlers tour in 2022, when the Tate set was officially back in operation, and they did a number of parallel runs, to Box Hill and to Sunshine. And finally, triple K classes, K190, K183, and K153 did some triple heading on one tour to Ballarat and another tour to Taralgi. Hello all, I hope you like this video. Mainline heritage in Victoria is certainly lively. As a rail enthusiast living here, there are very few places I'd rather be. Maybe New South Wales. All of the organisations I have mentioned today are volunteer run, and I'll leave a link to all of their websites in the description below. If you'd like a place to hang out, consider joining the Discord. And if you want to support me further, consider joining the Patreon. Links in the description. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all later.